Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about things I don't like. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, could you give an example of something you don't like about being a software engineer? Or what do you least enjoy about being a software engineer? Well, uh, the thing that I don't really like is to see the analogy I usually use is that if you imagine the wheel on a cart, like that's going through, like that's rolling down a street or something like that, and that wheel goes through some mud. Usually that's fine, you get some stains or something like that, but after going through the mud a few times, you see the wheel starting to slow down because it's not like the rotation is slowing down due to the mud that you are accumulating. And that process of seeing something going from being fairly efficiently working to, like, due to negligence and like all these sort of things that kind of come with the issue of scaling up people and processes, the slowing down of all of that and seeing the inefficiencies sort of seep into the work process is probably the thing that I least like about being a software engineer. Because software development is super fun when you're working on like an interesting problem, or you kind of can get to pat yourself on the shoulder a little bit and say that, hey, you did a great job, you solved this this cool problem in a good way or something like that. But that's not everything. That's not the norm. The norm is, depending on your project, that you're dealing with different types of systems. You're trying to figure out how other people have built their systems, and if you're working at a large scale in large scale types of systems, it's very common that you have issues shipping certain functionality due to the decisions that other people have made. And the reality is that just as it's impossible to have like a football team can't just have all star players, you will have different people who have different qualities and different skill level within a large system. Now the problem with that is usually that when you have people who are not so able to produce good results in one part of the system, that since everything is sort of tied together, that flows downwards, or like it cascades to other systems. A classic one is that I found, I mean, this is probably relatable for a lot of people. If you've ever tried to integrate to some API somewhere, and then you go and talk to the team that owns that API, they might not respond, and then you have some documentation, they don't have any, or if they have any, it's outdated, it's not correct, or things like that. Then you try to connect to the API, and there's a issue with their API, like the overall way that they are taking care of the system is pretty poor, or maybe they designed it in a really strange way, which also happens. And it really comes down to like and it comes down to a very complicated mishmash between what their requirements are and whether or not they're up to the task of fixing this problem. And what really happens at that stage is that you can't really fix this problem, because there's already there's an established quote unquote way of doing it, so you can't really do much more than to mitigate the potential impact this thing has on other work. I'll give you an example. I can take a very concrete example that happened to me a few months ago. So we had a request from where we wanted to do a simple thing, a very, very simple thing. We needed to list the result set of all the like a list from an API. That's all we needed to do. And then we go to the API, like the team that owns the API, and said we were going to need to be able to list all of the this information that you have. And they said, yeah, we have a listing API. And they send us some basic documentation, and it turns out that they enforce pagination on every call, which is a reasonable thing. But the problem is that we can't actually search for anything. Like, we can't actually filter the data in any way. So I go to the team and I say, well, yeah, you have a listing option, but you don't support any type of like sorting or ordering. Like, you have, the only thing you have is like, here is a bunch of data, and you have pagination, which is great because that's what we need, right? But it's one part is that it's enforced, so we have to do it that way, and the other part is that we can't just query and actually get out the data that we're looking for. There is no filtering options or anything like that. And they said, no, we've never had that requirement before. And I go, could we build that? And then you go through, like, then basically, you know, it becomes a question of, can we prioritize this? Then we have to scope it. Then we have to like do all of these, like there's a million things in between here and there. And so my manager goes and says, yeah, but we don't have time wait for them to, because I mean, this feature could, quote unquote, because of their other priorities, take forever to get built. And I go, yeah, it's just that if we want to provide this functionality to our users, this is what they have to build. And so they ask us, okay, how can you possibly, well, you have to find some workaround, there has to be some way. And I go, yeah, what we could do is that we could basically pull the entire database, request by request. We can't just get all the data. We have to literally just loop over every page in the database, collect all the data, and do the filtering client side for every request. And the managers just like in their ears, like what they hear is, oh, there's a way forward here. And all the developers go, this is really, really bad. It's, I mean, we were basically putting like a band-aid on top of something, a fairly severe problem and a limitation in this API that they need to fix. But it was a way, so we did it that way. Then, of course, later on, it turns out that we had issues because of request throttling, because basically when we had more than 5 people trying to do this, sometimes the API just threw back like the request limit had been breached, because basically the API is not designed like to work in this fashion. No sane system works this way, but we are forced to do this because we cannot do it in any other way. Not because it's technologically impossible, but due to one part, a kind of it's a matter of priorities versus people implementing things in a way that makes it borderline impossible for us to do things in any other fashion. I mean, at the very least, being able to set the amount of data you want to retrieve from the API would have been, you know, a desirable feature. But in this case, they had made that decision, so there was no way of doing it. So what I want you to take away from this is that it's the thing that I don't really enjoy so much about software engineering is to be in a, like, to continue to come back to a situation where you're sort of forced to find workarounds to a lot of stuff. And if you deal with people who are really, really good at what they do, usually you can get, like, a lot of stuff can work out really, really well, but you can't have that guarantee in software engineering. It's simply not possible. It's not necessarily because people are bad at their jobs. It can be anything from that, you know, the stakeholders are demanding something that the system was never designed to do, to that the prior system is working in a certain way, and there's simply no desire, or, like, you know, you don't want people to redo it, so you have to latch on something on top. And it's sort of like, at the end of it, it feels like the whole thing is is holding together with duct tape, basically. And that is a process that is a little bit soul crushing for you, because usually as an engineer, you of course want to do really well and you want to create really great things. But in many cases, the best you can do is to make something less awful. And there's a lot of that going on in IT. Have a great day.